Laura, and that's my husband Nayar out there, and we do StarPodTrek podcast. And this is our third time presenting a panel for you at DragonCon, and we're happy to be here. We are both longtime DragonCon goers.
When you say how long have you been coming?
This is my 30th DragonCon. I've seen a lot of changes. I actually started before the Trek track was here, but the Trek track made it really special and made sure that I would keep coming back.
So you started coming when you were 4?
Yes, exactly. I was 4. Not really, but thank you. So we have Vulcans, the people and their culture, and Vulcans who are regulars. We know that Spock, Tuvok, and T'Pol were regulars on a Star Trek series. And so how much do we know about Vulcans? Off the top, emotionless and logical, of course, that's their trademark, and very intelligent.
That's the first thing we think of with regards to Vulcans, no doubt about it.
Yeah, these are the things that usually characterize Vulcans. Besides their physical characteristics. So let's just think about, like, when we say Vulcans are emotionless, but what are emotions exactly? A natural, instinctive state of mind deriving from one's circumstances, mood, or relationship with others, or it could be instinctive or intuitive feeling as distinguished from reasoning or knowledge. So do Vulcans really lack emotions?
No.
So, and of course, this is from the page, and you see Spock smiling here. You know that back then they hadn't defined his character as much. So they said Spock experienced desperation in the Galileo 7.
Envy in Requiem from Methuselah.
And just to describe some of these other Vulcan words, Kolinar, through which all emotion is finally shed, from Star Trek The Motion Picture, and this other word, Sophia, the stricture that binds our emotions, but few of us are that perfectly Vulcan. And it wasn't said on screen, it's from the script for 2009, but I love that word, Sophia, because it actually came from the novels. It was another thing they tried to use from Star Trek novels in some of the canon. And so let's compare these three main Vulcans. Spock, we know, was half human and half Vulcan.
I say most people, when they think of Vulcans, sees the first one that comes up.
Yes, Spock is the classic one, of course. He was our introduction to Vulcans. He really set the standard for it. And so was he really typical? So we got to see, of course, his parents, his first home far, his first time being happy. We got to see his friendships and his relationships with some women. So he actually had some good character development just in 3 seasons of Star Trek and then going on to the movies. Tuvok was more sure of himself than Spock. Tuvok was he was pure Vulcan. His character wasn't really as complex. I think his character didn't really grow as much during 7 seasons of Voyager. He had a family, of course, and this is him with his wife, T'Pel. Tuvok contrasted with Neelix. Spock contrasted with McCoy. You see how they tried to give both of these Vulcans an opposite character, someone to interact with that was totally different from them? And then we have T'Pol from Enterprise. She wore an illogically tight cat suit. Right? There was no reason for this except for the ratings. And she was the first Vulcan we know of in history that worked that closely with humans. Now, in Spock's evolution from TOS to the motion picture to the rest of the movies, his character actually grew. I mean, it grew and changed as he got older. And then later on, he became the wise old sage. more like a mentor to Picard later on, and even to the Spock of the Kelvin timelines that we saw in the JJ movies.
And I loved how they had him mature throughout the years. That was such a warm welcome home when he came back on Next Generation.
And then what about some other Vulcans? Surak, Vulcan's foremost philosopher of peace. So the one on the lower left is from the original series, and then the other one is from Enterprise. So they had a different actor that looked nothing like him, but they were both called, they actually called him Surak at first, and then in Enterprise they pronounced it Surak. And then T'Pau. And then you see how they changed the look of her character from the original series to what was supposed to be the younger T'Pau on Enterprise. She helped reform Vulcan society as a Cyrenite. You remember the Cyrenites were a Vulcan, like a cult group, that said that they followed the original teachings of Surak. And Kirk called T'Pau all of Vulcan in one package, the only person to turn down a seat on the Federation Council. A very important and well-known Vulcan. And this is Siren, who founded the Cyrenites, as mentioned on Enterprise. And they're the ones who basically changed the Vulcans. Remember how on Enterprise, the first 3 seasons, the Vulcans were totally different, right? They didn't believe in doing mind mails. It was considered something like a cultural thing that you just didn't do. Like
Invasion.
Normal people didn't do it.
Yeah.
And they didn't believe in time travel.
Mm-hmm.
And these were things that this guy Siren changed about the Vulcans.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the Vulcan lute, or sometimes called the Vulcan lyre on Star Trek. So we know you have the picture here of Spock playing it. But Tuvok also played it in the song Fowler's Journey. He said he used to play for his youngest son. Uhura was the only non-Vulcan that we've seen playing this instrument. And there was a deleted scene on the original series where they stated that Spock won 2nd place in a Vulcan lute competition, with his father placing 1st. That's just an interesting little insight there. And it was pronounced Kathyra, which was mentioned on Star Trek Picard. And Kathyra was another thing that came from the novels that they actually made canon and used on Star Trek. I love when they do that. I'm an avid Star Trek novel reader as well. Food and beverage. Very different things. These are just sort of like mentionables. Gespar, a Vulcan fruit often served for breakfast. Jumbo Vulcan mollusk, plummeek soup or broth. Pop-tar, Vulcan Admiral Vanix.
Pop-Tarts?
Pop-tar. That's the reason it's spelled out here. And red spice, which is a spice native to Vulcan. And then on other shows, they have mentioned things like Vulcan brandy, Vulcan mocha, Vulcan tea, Vulcan port, Vulcan spice tea, which was favored by Captain Janeway. There's a Vulcan tea served by Tuvok to Captain Sulu. And then there's even a Vulcan mint tea, which, as Spock's stepmother mentioned, that it really doesn't taste anything like mint. And there are actually Vulcan holidays that have been mentioned. Calrek, a day of atonement, solitude, and silence, which is similar to something called a festival at the Planahath. There's the Tal Shinar, which was a spiritual practice. And there's the Rumari, which was like an ancient pagan festival with barely clothed Vulcans covered in grease and chasing each other, and it's no longer practiced. And there are actually there's some fan fiction stories where it says that they still practice the Rumari, at least in Sarek's time. I know I read some of those. So you can find stories like that out there. And there are Vulcan rituals. And we know this symbol too, right? The Idic symbol, which has come to represent Vulcan. Now the rituals, we know there's the Cos-1, an adolescent Vulcan must survive alone in the desert and is considered a test of maturity. And this was mentioned on the animated series and on Enterprise. And this picture was young Spock from the animated series. There's the Kunut Caliphate, which means marriage or challenge, which was from the episode of Mock Time when Spock went back and had to get married when he was going through the Pon farr.
The Faltorpan, the refusion. I think this is one of the most beautiful scenes that you see on Vulcan.
This is from Star Trek 3, of course. Yeah, and I just noticed the one in the background with their head down. It's like they have to honor them, just, you know, you with your head down, like this is a very solemn moment. And they have mentioned Vulcan religion on the show. Before the time of awakening, apparently there was a god of war, a god of peace, and a god of death. And the time of awakening is usually what we consider the time when the Romulans left Vulcan thousands of years ago. Spock mentioned a journey to the family shrine to honor their gods in the episode Yesteryear. So that we know that at least they did have gods. We don't think they have this type of religion now. And they have a martial art that they call the Sus Mana, practiced by both DePaul and Michael Burnham. And it was actually named after Mike Sussman, who was a writer and producer for Voyager and Enterprise. First contact day, April 5th, 2063. The Vulcan ship Planahath detected the warp flight of Zefram Cochrane's ship, the Phoenix. And we still celebrate First Contact Day, of course, it hasn't even happened yet. It's coming in a few years. We'll be a few years older by then, but that's pretty neat. And so last April 5th, you know, CBS celebrated First Contact Day. They had an online thing where they were showing all the pilot episodes of all the Star Trek shows online. And of course, the tender side of Vulcans, Spock with the cat, Isis, and then Spock holding a tribble. And of course we know that Spock he did have a pet as a child, so he enjoys these animal creatures.
How can you be emotionalist petting that cute little cat?
I know, wasn't it great? And remember the episode Assignment Earth when he had the cat? When he had been holding that cat for a long time. And then Kirk said, Spock, what do you make of the cat? And Spock said, a very lovely animal, Captain. Just like, you know, saying it's a pretty cat, not saying like, well, is it a real cat, or what do you think it is, an Earth cat or anything? And he just basically said it's lovely. Telepathy and powers of the mind. We know that Vulcans are touch telepaths. The mind meld. At first, Spock was reluctant to do it, but later he didn't seem to mind. Remember, the first time he did it was in the episode Dagger of the Mind. And he said, this could be very dangerous. It's never been done on a human. But then after that, he did it several times after that. Like it was just nothing. Okay, I'll do it, you know. And this is from the immunity syndrome. And remember, that this is just another example of their telepathy, because Spock could feel the deaths of hundreds of Vulcans. And they were on another ship far away. But Spock knew that those people had died because he could sense it. And here we have Sarek and his second wife, Perrin. And of course, Sarek is Spock's father. And this is another ritual, again, as we were saying, but it also shows their telepathic abilities of being able to put Spock's Katra back in his body. And let me, we go back to this. So this was from the episode where Sarek was affected by Bendai syndrome, which is kind of like Alzheimer's, the Vulcan version of Alzheimer's, where he was losing control of his emotions. And he was able to project his emotions unwittingly onto everyone else on the Enterprise. All the people on the ship were becoming angry at each other. And it was because Sarek was projecting his emotions on them. So it's very, they're strong telepaths, obviously. And of course, Spock's brother Sybok, whom they seem to have forgotten on Discovery. But Sybok was a very atypical Vulcan. He expressed emotions. And he also had these strange telepathic gifts where he could take away your pain by first letting you relive something from your past that you're guilty about. So in McCoy's case, it was his father dying. And in Spock's case, it was being born when Spock was born and his father said, he's so human. That seems like a big thing for Spock to live with. So it means like he grew up with his father not quite liking his human half, even though Sarah, of course, married a human woman, and that was what he chose to do. And we also know that the Vulcans like to meditate. We've seen this several times on different Star Trek shows. And there are Vulcan ships. We've seen the Diplanahath and the Surak class on Enterprise, and then the Surak, which was a shuttle. It was the shuttle from the motion picture where Spock, that he was on it, that where he went to Enterprise. He took that shuttle. Okay, who can answer this? What is Kira Kintha's first law of metaphysics?
Anybody?
I'm really good.
Yes. Okay, who knows this one? Who said logic is the cement of our civilization with which we ascend from chaos using reason as our guide? Did you say it?
Yeah.
Okay, what did you say?
I thought it was wrong.
No, that's a good answer though. Diplanahath, matron of Vulcan philosophy. And so these questions were asked and answered in Star Trek: The Voyage Home and in Enterprise: The Forge episode. Remember when Spock was taking the quiz and the computer asked those questions?
And what's the Star Wars Easter egg in that?
So we got to meet Kirk Thatcher. That's his name. He's been here at Dragon Con, but he was actually one of the writers for Star Trek 4, and he's the one who made up these questions and these answers. So the one where he said Diplanahath, he said that name actually comes from Star Wars. It's the planet Hoth. He just made it. I know, isn't it great? I always loved that name Diplanahath. And of course, Nayar knows if I ever want to make up a ship, I want the ship to be Diplanahath. But also the other name, Kira Kintha, Kirk Thatcher said that is his. It's an anagram of his name. He kind of rearranged the letters and made up Kira Kintha. Oh, and he's the guy that was in Star Trek 4 that played the punk rocker, that played the loud music. That's him. Now, for the Vulcan language, James Doohan created the Vulcan language in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, as well as the Klingon language. So now do you remember this was in a trivia contest we attended one time?
That's right.
The original words for Vulcan were created by James Doohan and Klingon.
There were select words and phrases.
Yes. So we remember when Spock said, or it was actually the Vulcan high priestess in the motion picture said, Divtor es musma, Spock, which means live long and prosper. The Vulcan dialogue that was used in Star Trek 2 and 3 and Enterprise was translated by Mark Okran. So they got Mark Okran, he's the one that's credited with creating the Klingon language. They brought him in as early as Star Trek 2. And of course, he fully developed the Klingon language. The Vulcan language has not been completely developed. There's just a few words from it. Ponfo Maran means go to hell in Vulcan. Something that Hoshi happened to have picked up. And we have other examples of Vulcan words: Ponfar, Kroika, Kolinar, Faltorpan, Talab, Kazwan, Salat, Plaktal, Talshaya, Susmana, Tahila, Shanhalak, and Sathia. So the word Tahila was actually from the motion picture. It was in the novelization. They didn't say it in the movie, but in the motion picture novelization, written by Gene Roddenberry, they said the word could mean best friend or it could mean lover. And Shanhalak, the one second from the bottom, means love at first sight. I just thought that was interesting. The Vulcans actually have a word for love at first sight. And Vulcan calligraphy, we saw this for the first time on Spock's robe when he first appeared in Star Trek: The Motion Picture. And this is apparently what it means: Rata, Tafar, and Tapan, which are the Vulcan words for concept, discipline, and process. This is not really canon, but it was on something Like someone bought this at a Star Trek auction. It was some kind of a plaque that had these words on it, like it was made to be used on screen on Star Trek, but they just never used it. So it's something that was probably meant to be canon that somehow got dropped. And there's this great book by Dayton Ward called Star Trek Vulcan, and it's made as a travel guide. It has a chapter for each major city, shows large bodies of water, has restaurants and lodging. It's just a cool book to own. We have this book. It still is not considered canon, but it's a fun book to read.
The planet Vulcan is considered hot, dry, and arid, and we could see that first time we saw it was in Amok Time. We get that image of a red sky. Later on, it was developed in Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
So going back to this one, I noticed in this book it said that Vulcan has large bodies of water. That's been something that we wonder about. In some of the novels, they like to say that there are no large bodies of water on Vulcan, and that most Vulcans don't know how to swim. But sometimes, we think that maybe there could be some water on Vulcan. There has to be some. But it's mostly dry and arid. We mostly think of the Vulcan deserts, like the Vulcan Forge. Places on Vulcan that they've mentioned: Kier, Gaul, Real, Shikar, Mount Salea, and Vulcan's Forge. Shikar, which is supposed to be the home city where Spock is from. Tukut, which means Charis, Vulcan's twin planet. Well, Charis that's the Earth word for it. That's the Greek god Charis. Of course, remember when they said that Vulcan has no moon? And then in the motion picture, they showed something in the Vulcan sky that looks like a moon. So now we say that that's just Vulcan's twin planet, and the orbit makes it come close enough to Vulcan sometimes that it looks like a moon. And they named it Tukut. And Nivar, if you watch Discovery, this is from season 3 of Discovery. You remember when Spock was working on trying to reunite Vulcans and Romulans? In Discovery, they said Spock succeeded. I mean, it happened many years after he died, but Vulcan and Romulans are actually all now one. They all live on the planet Vulcan, except Vulcan has now been renamed Nivar. So it's the planet now that includes Vulcans and Romulans. And here we have a Salat, and we heard they can be wild or domesticated. You see the one from yesteryear and the one from Vulcan's Forge on Enterprise. But remember when they had Spock's parents in Journey to Babel, and Spock's mother said Spock had a pet Salat, and she called it a fat teddy bear. And then later when Spock was telling McCoy, Spock said the teddy bears on Vulcan are alive and have 6-inch fangs. It's amazing. How can Amanda, Spock's mother, think that was a teddy bear? Maybe Earth teddy bears are a lot bigger in the 23rd century. And we have the Lamantia here, which was a Vulcan mountain lion. Now we have the Vulcan finger touching. See, we do that, like we do it, like before we eat a meal, we do that together. It's like our way of saying grace. So you see that couples do it to express love or to express deep feelings. And of course, Spock and Saavik did it in Star Trek 3. And there are some games, of course, 3D chess, we know Spock and Kirk played that. And then Calto was a Vulcan game. Now, are Vulcans arrogant and egotistical?
Yes.
Absolutely.
I mean, is it logical to be that way? Well, they think it is, because they think logically they really are superior to humans. Oh, Mr. Spock, you do have one saving grace after all. You're ill-mannered. Remember when Trelane said that? And we do know there are Vulcan hybrids. Saavik was supposedly supposed to be Vulcan and Romulan, But by the time they got to Star Trek 3, and when they had Robin Curtis playing the part, they kind of made her more like a full Vulcan. But Spock is half human, half Vulcan. Then we had Elizabeth from Enterprise that was Trip and T'Pol's daughter. Lorian, also on Enterprise, was Trip and T'Pol's son in an alternate timeline. And of course, Tuvix. Poor Tuvix, all the controversy about him. Tuvok and Neelix combined. Should Tuvix have lived? I heard no and yes. Okay, that's a story for another day. I think they talked about it a lot. Was it 2 years ago or maybe 3 years ago? There was a panel on it. Okay, so we know the famous Vulcan nerve pinch, and this was Leonard Nimoy explaining it. He was saying that Vulcans have something, energy coming from their fingertips that allow them to do the Vulcan nerve pinch.
Which I thought that was the explanation that made the most sense.
Yeah, he was trying to say that no one can do it but Vulcans, because Vulcans have that energy in their fingers.
And he was the one that developed the nerve pinch.
He is the one, and here you see Spock doing it. It was in the Corbomite maneuver when Spock was supposed to punch someone or do something to incapacitate a person, and Leonard Nimoy said Vulcans probably wouldn't do it the ordinary way, so he came up with this idea of doing the nerve pinch, something that's just, it looks more civil, it doesn't look violent. And 7 of 9 trying to do it. And Picard did it on Tuvok. That wasn't Tuvok, of course. That's Tim Russ playing a different part on The Next Generation. But Picard was able to do the nerve pinch, so it's not just Vulcans who can do it. And the theory is that this episode happened after the time that Sarek and Picard mind melded. So Picard probably knew how to do it because of that mind meld with Sarek.
Question?
Yes, kid?
So, Spock couldn't have developed it, though, because we see in one of the first episodes...
No, Leonard Nimoy developed it.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, because you see Paul do it in one of the first episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you do see her do it too. And so, of course, and McCoy here tries unsuccessfully to do it when he had Spock's Katra.
Yeah.
Question over here?
Well, I would also note that in terms of other people being able to do it, I don't remember which episode it comes from, but there is an instance in the original series where Spock nerve pinches somebody, and, Kirk just makes an offhanded comment about how that's, such a useful trick, and he says, I've offered to teach you many times, Captain.
Mm-hmm.
That's right, that did happen. Exactly. So I guess, so Kirk, implying that Kirk, didn't really want to learn. Bendai syndrome, remember this episode? This was kind of sad about Sarek. He had Bendai syndrome and was losing control of his emotions, so he had to give he had to mind meld with Picard so that Picard could negotiate with the Ligarans and, do this important mission. The Idic symbol and the Vulcan salute. You see Spock wearing the necklace there, the Idic necklace, and of course the Vulcan salute has really become a famous trademark of Spock and something that represents Star Trek. When I'm wearing a Starfleet uniform, a lot of people do this when they see me wearing it. Like they know what this is. They at least know it's from Star Trek.
Now here's the piece of trivia. In that episode that the necklace was shown, did they ever say infinite diversity and infinite combinations? Infinite diversity in infinite combinations?
That's what IDIC stands for. So when was the first time we actually heard them say what it stands for? It wasn't until the animated series. What I remember is they kind of danced around it. I remember them saying infinite diversity and how our differences combine to create meaning and beauty. They said all of that.
So we're going to interrupt this panel for a moment just to fill you in on what happened. So we made the statement that the phrase infinite diversity in infinite combinations was never mentioned in any original series episode. An acronym for IDIC came to the fore later on. Well, at this point, some people in the audience started saying, no, that's not true.
So, yeah, there was a little back and forth there, and
which I thought was odd because we've given this presentation at numerous conventions.
Right, and no one ever disagreed.
Yeah, exactly.
Or at least, they didn't speak up anyway.
But it was good that some did bring it up. We didn't obviously have the episode with us to prove that it was never in there, and we weren't going to view the entire episode in the middle of a panel. But some people do realize the amount of work and research that we put into our panels, and we go over every detail. I knew that, okay, you're wrong, but here, real world, I'm the honest one, and you're the nice one.
Well, yeah, because I didn't want to argue with
exactly.
them. Right.
So I took a back seat. I didn't want to shut anybody up, so I said, okay, let's just move on. You even started almost to doubt yourself, saying, well, maybe you saw an edited episode?
I did mention that as a possibility.
But I knew, I was like, nope, we've seen these episodes hundreds of times before.
But I knew I saw it in the 70s, and I knew what they said, and I was able to quote word for word what was said in the episode.
Of course. But for the sake of keeping the panel moving and not wanting to argue, we just didn't even want to continue the back and forth. So, for the sake of clarity, and we didn't want to violate any copyright violations, so that's why we're not putting the actual segments on YouTube right now. But for the sake of clarity, we need to address this. The first thing I did when I came home after Dragon Con, instead of popping the episode in, I said, I really try and think in the minds of others who are insistent that this phrase was in the episode. I said, well, maybe they were thinking of the James Blish adaptation. And so the first thing I did was I pulled the James Blish adaptation out, and you remember in the episode, there's two instances of Spock wearing the IDIC.
Yes, he wore it in the scene where they were sitting around the table, and then at the end when Miranda and Ambassador Callas were beaming off. Correct.
So I looked in the James Blish adaptation to see maybe this was what they were thinking about. We looked in the B. Joe Trimble's concordance. Obviously, no mention there. The Alan Asherman concordance, no mention there. But I do think it's worthy to consider what was brought out in the James Blish adaptation. So they're sitting at the dinner table, and this is what it says.
Spock pulled back, fearful of scratching her. Forgive me, he said. I forget that dress uniforms can injure. That part's weird. She leaned toward him. I was merely interested in your Vulcan IDIC, Mr. Spock. Is it a reminder that you could mind meld with the ambassador much more effectively than I could? There was an uncomfortable pause. She broke it hastily, explaining, it would be most difficult for a Vulcan to see a mere human take on this exciting challenge, gentlemen. Interesting, McCoy said. It's a fact, Spock, that you rarely wear your IDIC. Bones, Kirk said, I doubt that our first officer would don the most revered of all Vulcan symbols merely to annoy a guest. Spock spoke for himself, looking straight at Miranda. In fact, I wore it this evening to honor you, Dr. Jones.
Okay, so a mention of IDIC is at the dinner table in the book.
But no mention of what it means, just that it's a revered Vulcan symbol.
Correct. And what's the phrase on the episode?
I'm just noticing your Vulcan IDIC, Mr. Spock. That's what Miranda said to Spock, yes.
Correct. No mention of infinite diversity in infinite combinations. Now, let's read the James Blish adaptation for the end scene.
At the platform, Spock, in dress uniform, was wearing his IDIC. The girl touched it. I understand the symbology now, Mr. Spock. The marvel is in the infinite diversity of life. He met her eyes gravely, and in the ways our differences can combine to create new truth and beauty.
Let's see what the episode has to say with regards to that scene.
I understand, Mr. Spock. The glory of creation is in its infinite diversity. And then Spock said, and the ways our differences combine to create meaning and beauty.
Once and for all, the phrase infinite diversity in infinite combinations was never mentioned on an original series episode.
Exactly. They said infinite diversity, but not the whole phrase.
Gene Roddenberry he did create a company called Lincoln Enterprises that was supposed to sell Star Trek merchandise. It was, another way to make money. And so, and it was actually Bijou Trimble. She talked about this, that, Bijou knew Gene at the time and came up with the idea that to make something to sell, well, it should be something small and flat, like a piece of jewelry. And there was also a mention that they wanted Kirk to wear it, and Kirk wouldn't do it. This is what I heard. Like, William Shatner refused to wear it because it was a merchandising ploy, and somehow Leonard Nimoy did agree to wear it. So they made it a Vulcan thing. They wrote it in the script. This is a Vulcan symbol. So, yeah, that kind of taints it to know that story about it, because I love the IDIC symbol. I like to think that it was created just because they wanted to exploit the idea of infinite diversity. That sounds a lot better than saying, oh, it was just for merchandising. So IDIC Kulat Shan is the Vulcan word for IDIC, which was mentioned on Voyager. And here we have Michael Burnham. So you can see that she was wearing the IDIC symbol. And this one, it's a little harder to see, but in Star Trek II, the IDIC symbol was on the wall up here. It's huge right there behind Kirk. And some other fascinating facts. Vulcan literature had no demons, even though we already talked about they did have gods. And there is a Vulcan funeral dirge because Neelix learned to sing it. The first alien species created by Gene for Star Trek was the Vulcans. Vulcans worship peace above all, which is what McCoy said in Return to Tomorrow. And that's another thing that has carried on. We always say that Vulcans worship peace, that Vulcans are pacifists. And they are vegetarians. According to DC Fontana, and we know who DC Fontana is, she was one of the staff writers on The Next Generation and did a lot of stuff to create Vulcan culture and customs. Spockanelia was a fanzine back in the 60s. She wrote a letter to them and said, Spock's last name is this string of letters. I read this in Best of Trek a long time ago, and I made it my way to pronounce it. Extempers quizzit wolfa. That gets in all the letters. So this is the exact wording. Both his mother and father have been married only once to each other. Spock is an only child. There are absolutely no other siblings. I rejected Spock's last name as that. And so that is what she said. And of course that later got changed. But when she came up with that name, it really looks like she just ran her finger across her keyboard, right? That's what it looks like. Amok Time, first episode of the second season. By this time you could tell how popular Spock was. This episode featured the first trip to Vulcan, the Vulcan salute, and the saying, live long and prosper. So a lot came from that. And so this is how popular the Vulcans were by this time. They focused on Vulcans on the first episode of the second season. And do you know where Leonard Nimoy, he's the one who invented the Vulcan salute. Do you know where he got it from?
It's a Hebrew letter.
Yes, Hebrew letter, and he said that because he is Jewish, and he saw a Jewish priest do this one time, and so he decided to use that as the Vulcan salute. And a few quotes from Spock. I have been and always shall be your friend. You may find that having is not so pleasing a thing after all as wanting. It is not logical, but it is often true. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Or the one, yes. I object to intellect without discipline. I object to power without constructive purpose. So a few of those, there's great quotes from Spock. Does anybody have any others?
Logic is the beginning of wisdom?
Yes. Logic is the beginning of wisdom, not the end. Yes. Live long and prosper, peace and long life, illogical and fascinating. I call them Vulcan-isms. Myths, can Vulcans lie? Yeah, we've seen them lie. Is there a Vulcan death grip? No. Do they have sex only once every 7 years? Conniving, like Supreme?
Sometimes.
Rebel, like Sakona? Remember Sakona from Deep Space Nine?
It's my favorite part of Vulcans.
Home far, the time of mating?
Well, not the time.
Okay.
That's too long.
Very private matter. It was a neurochemical imbalance akin to madness, occurs in males and females. Gene Roddenberry came up with the idea of the time of mating for Vulcans. And now in this book, The Making of Star Trek, he said, not 7 years for all Vulcans. Occurs less often if the Vulcan is separated from his people. It occurs more often if the Vulcan is living among his people. So this was Gene's original idea, and of course this got changed too. But yeah, originally he was going to say that it really wasn't only every 7 years. Spock and Supreme were bonded when they were 7 years old, and that was an arrangement by their parents. And of course, famous Spock cosplayer. That's me as the Migo Klingon, but we know this Spock here, right? That's Paul Forrest, who usually comes here to Dragon Con, but he hasn't been here in a few years now. And other things, of course, there were the Vulcan toys, the shuttle, you've got the action figures of Spock. And then this right here, I mean, this is us on the Star Trek cruise, but this little bear right here, that is Spock Bear. A friend of ours had him. I am pleased to see that we have differences. May we together become greater than the sum of both of us. Surak. That's just a great closing quote. So we want to say again, we are Nayar and Kavora, and we have two podcasts, StarPodTrek and StarPodLog. StarPodTrek is everything Star Trek. StarPodLog is mostly vintage sci-fi, where we're going through Starlog magazines of old, 70s and 80s.
Anybody remember Starlog magazine back when that was our internet?
It was great. And of course, they had plenty of Star Trek articles, too. And we have the USS Athena, which is part of Starfleet Command. And we're based in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm the commanding officer. Nayar is the executive officer. And we're also members of Starfleet International, a separate club from Starfleet Command. So in Starfleet International, we're members of the USS Werner von Braun that's based in Huntsville. And we're members of the Klingon Assault Group. We have a ship called the XLV Predator. Nayar is the commanding officer, and I'm the executive officer. And in case you don't know about the Klingon Assault Group, so it is a Klingon group, but they also have a special division that's for aliens. So if you're interested in other aliens like Andorians or Vulcans, you could be part of the Imperial Xeno Legion. And we have a group called Tennessee Star Trek Fans that is on Facebook and on meetup.com. We have monthly meetups, viewing parties, dinner with friends, and field trips. We do it all.
So if you're thinking about visiting Nashville, Tennessee, and you'd like to come over our house, we do have once a month viewings. We've had visitors as far as Canada come over. We trek all the time, and you're a part of our Trek family. We'd love to welcome you if you're visiting Music City.
Joe, I was going to, seeing if you're still here. So in this picture, we've got the little floor mat you made. See right there?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I make
Joe created all the decorations that you see on the Trek track here. Yeah, a round of applause. He's amazing. And he's the commander of a local Starfleet Command chapter here in Atlanta.
USS Terminus, we love that. Yes. And then we build the place for us.
It's a great ship. We actually used to be members of the Terminus until we moved to Tennessee and started our own ship.
The Terminus, basically, we're more of like just a bunch of guys and girls and others. Just together and just hang out on track. Like the old days.
Okay, and where to find our podcast? StarPodLog, StarPodTrek. There's also Ladies Trek Library that I do with Jan Foley, who is a member of the USS Terminus, where we review Star Trek books. And we are on iTunes, Blogger, Spotify, or wherever you listen to fine podcasts. We are on Facebook. We have a Facebook group called StarPodLog and StarPodTrek. And then we have our Facebook profile that's called Nayon and Kabora, so you can friend us. We have a YouTube channel, StarPodLog and StarPodTrek Podcast. And we are on Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit. And we are part of it's a Star Trek network of podcasts. It's called Holosuite Media.
This is Kavor's 30th Dragon Con. Can we sing Happy Dragon Con to her? 1, 2, 3. Happy Dragon Con to you. Sing! Happy Dragon Con to you. Sing!
Happy Dragon Con, dear Aurora. Happy Dragon Con to you.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.